Hey, welcome to this summary of week 5 of our prayer adventure. Today we're looking at the subject of faith and prayer. What's the role of faith in prayer? This is actually a really complex topic. I'm sure will have heard people say sometimes, oh, well, if you just had more faith, then your prayer would have been answered. Ouch, that really hurts, doesn't it, when people say that? I'm comforted by the fact that key theologians also struggle with this issue of faith and where does faith fit in. I'm in good company here. There are not simplistic answers to this question. The role of faith is really highlighted in a passage in Matthew 17 where the disciples were unable to drive out a demon out of a boy, and Jesus then came down the mountain and fixed up the situation, and then the disciples said, well, what was going on there? Jesus said, you don't have enough faith. And he said, I'll tell you the truth, even if you had faith as small as a mustard seed, you could say to this mountain, move from here to there, and it would move. Nothing is impossible. Now, that seems a bit of a contradiction, because on one hand he says that faith's not enough, and then the next minute he says, well, you only need faith as small as a mustard seed, and you can move a mountain. And he's not being literal there. It's moving a mountain is a metaphor for great difficulty. So it's a bit challenging. How does that work? And if you look through the Gospels, Jesus seems to tell the disciples off for lack of faith quite a bit. He tells off Peter when he's trying to walk on water. When the disciples are in the boat, he tells them off when they start panicking. When the blind man Bartimaeus was healed, Jesus said it was because of his faith. Same with the bleeding woman, same with the son of the centurion that Jesus healed. He commended their faith. It says he couldn't do many miracles in his hometown because of lack of faith. So clearly this faith thing is linked to prayer, but how does it work? Well, some Christians see that faith is some kind of tool to use. And if you had enough faith, then and you use the tool correctly, your prayer will be answered. There's a couple of problems with that view. It puts the power of answered prayer in the hands of the one praying, and therefore puts the blame for unanswered prayer on the one who prays without sufficient faith. So God bows to our faith, as it were. It puts us at the centre. It also leads to really selfish kind of prayers where we're praying just in a name it, claim it sort of mentality. So, not good. Theologians who have wrestled with this say the issue is not the quantity of faith, it's the quality of the faith. Maybe the disciples had come to think they were somehow special and partly responsible for the answered prayer. Maybe their motive was wrong, they were seeking to impress the crowds. The fact is, Jesus prayed 3 times for the cross to be removed in the Garden of Gethsemane. No one's suggesting he didn't have enough faith, but ultimately his request had to be submitted to the will of God. True faith ultimately is in a person, not a result. It's in the goodness and the character and the power of God. If you read Hebrews and the great chapter on faith in Hebrews chapter 11, it's really interesting because it talks about these great men and women of faith and the things they had done. First of all, defines faith as a confidence in God. And he lists off some of the great men and women of faith. But then he says, but hang on a moment, there's also others who were tortured, who were jeered at, who died for their faith. And he says, all these people had a good reputation, yet none of them received all that God had promised. So some of these guys had achieved great feats for God, others were sawn in two and suffered greatly. But it says all of them didn't see all they were promised. There's a sense in which they didn't see the full fulfillment of what they believed God had promised them. So it raises the question, can we have faith in a particular outcome of prayer? Maybe we've sought God, we believe it's in line with his will, maybe there's no unconfessed sin in our life, our motives are right, maybe we've sensed God confirm he's going to do this. Yes, I think we can have confidence in an outcome in terms of prayer, remembering God doesn't promise health, wealth or protection from hardship. I think we can. I think the more we understand God's character and heart, the more likely it's that our prayer will be in line with his will. And I think sometimes we have more confidence based on our experience. I've seen God work in particular areas, in terms of provision for staff over the years, both here and in Topua. I have confidence in God answering that prayer. Other areas, maybe I struggle a bit more to be confident. I struggled with seeing God provide for the hub, having the faith to believe that, even though I believed it was right. But I think our confidence in an outcome for prayer has to be like in the book of Daniel, when King Nebuchadnezzar threatened to put Daniel's friends in the fiery furnace. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego said, "O Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you. If we are thrown into the burning furnace, the God whom we serve is able to save us. He will rescue us from your power, your majesty. But even if he doesn't, we want to make clear to you, your majesty, that we will never serve your gods or worship the gold statue you've set up." So they were saying, look, we believe God is able to save us. And we think he will. Now, I don't know why they were confident God would rescue them. I mean, heaps of other people died for their faith and not been saved from martyrdom. Well, I don't know why they had that confidence. Maybe God had whispered it to in their spirits. No, I mean, I'd just be hoping it would be over quickly. But but they say, no, we are confident God is going to rescue us. But they say, even if he doesn't, we're still going to believe in God. Their faith was in God more than the outcome. They weren't going to bet absolutely everything on being saved. They were not going to say, well, if God doesn't save me, then he's not real and I'm going to get disillusioned and hurt. No. They weren't going to get disillusioned with God if he didn't answer the way they thought. So for whatever reason, they had faith that God would rescue them, but they also allowed for the sovereignty of God. That maybe God had a different plan. Maybe they'd heard from God wrongly. Maybe God had something better in mind, just like the great heroes in Hebrews 11, who never saw all that God had promised them. But they still believed that God was working out his purposes. And I think that's a really good attitude to have. Now, I think the quality of our faith grows the more we understand the character of God and the heart of God. That God's care, that God is able, that God is good. God's desire to see his kingdom come about, that God is sovereign. And that will help us in terms of the quality of our faith. The more we understand God's character. I think the quality of our faith grows as we learn to discern the whispers of God, when our desires begin to line up with God's heart. And I think our faith quality will grow as we step out in areas and see God come through. John Ortberg wrote a great book once called "If You Want to Walk on Water, You've Got to Get Out of the Boat." That is, faith grows. Faith grows as it's stretched. If you don't stretch our faith like a muscle, it doesn't get bigger, but it withers. The quality of our faith matters. The quantity, not so much. Just enough faith, like a mustard seed, is all we require. I trust that's helpful as you think about the role of faith in your prayer life.